Welcome to another edition of E.W. Jackson for President. Great to be with you again this morning with an update on the various goings on with regard to my campaign. I've got several issues I want to cover with you as well. Let me begin by mentioning that you all know this, right? Because I talk about it from time to time. Part of what a candidate must do during a campaign is to be on the telephone constantly. Now, some campaigns may grow beyond this. I'm sure that Donald Trump's campaign has, and maybe some others have as well. But in the normal course, everybody who is running for president knows this and has done this and is probably doing this. You're on the phone hours a day calling people to raise money. Now, that job has been made more difficult for me because the mainstream media has basically boycotted my campaign. So when I call people, it's more difficult because I have to introduce myself as a candidate. And I haven't seen anything about you on the news. Because the mainstream media, I think under the influence of the RNC, has basically decided that I am not, from their perspective, quote unquote, a declared candidate. Well, I am a declared candidate, so they're lying. I mean, they're just flat out lying. I'm a declared Republican candidate. So I spend several hours a day doing that. And that's part of a big part of every day of my life. If I'm not on the road, at some point during the day, for hours at a time, I'm on the phone, dialing, calling, talking to people. Well, because I'm not a complete unknown, even though the mainstream media wants to make it out that way. From time to time, I call people and say, oh, yeah, I know, of course I know you. I know you, Bishop Jackson. I know you, EW. I know. Okay, great. So yesterday, I was calling Texas, and I called one of my supporters, didn't know it, but one of the people who supported me over the years said, man, I came to your first stand conference, and which, my goodness, that had to be 7, 8 years ago. He said, I've been supporting you and following you throughout. And here's what the person said to me. I said, well, you knew I was running. He said, well, I knew you said you were running, but I thought you dropped out because I hadn't seen anything in the media acknowledging your candidacy. And I told him, I said, well, that's the problem. That's the problem. The mainstream media, in spite of your support, in spite of the support of others, has decided that my candidacy is not worthy of their acknowledgement. We're going to change that. So we had a nice conversation, though. I said, love, please pay no attention to that. I am a candidate. In fact, as I said before, in 3 days, I will be in Iowa. In fact, I'll be back in Iowa 3 times in September. And then who knows how many times in October, November, December. But I'm going to invest a lot of time and energy in Iowa because I think the people of Iowa and I are in sync. And I think when they find out about my candidacy, many of them are going to say, you know what, that guy speaks to me more accurately and precisely than anybody else in this race. And I mean that, than anybody else in this race on every issue. The economic issues, military and national security issues, and the cultural issues as well. But I had a nice conversation and with this person and of course their supporter and understood. So that's why I ask you all to pray for me because we've got to break through this wall, if you will. They don't want a wall on the border, but they certainly do want a wall between my candidacy and the American people. And there's a reason for that because they don't want you to hear what I have to say. I had another incident, however. Juxtapose these two. Here's I'm calling somebody in Texas who knows me and supports me and it was surprised that they haven't seen me acknowledged in the media as a candidate. And now I call somebody in Virginia who I thought was a supporter because of the names I was going through. And by the way, it's probably my fault, not the fault of those who are feeding me names, probably my fault because I was probably responsible for putting this person's name in from some interaction from years ago, and I misunderstood. This happened to be a pastor, a local pastor on Virginia Beach. And I told him, hey, I'm E.W. Jackson. I'm running for president. I know who you are. I said, oh, well, great. I said, I don't know when we met. I think he said, well, you know, the reason why you know me is I was the head of the Ministers Alliance. And I said, oh, okay. Now I'm thinking, because I know these ministers' alliances in these cities tend to be extremely liberal, leftist, Marxist. So I said, oh, okay. I said, well, great. Interrupted me. Are you running as a Republican or Democrat? I said, I'm running as a Republican. And that was it. I don't know how you can run as a Republican. And then the platitudes started. I mean, just nothing but platitudes, no substance. He said, for example, the Republican Party takes the black community as suckers. Yeah, that's a quote. The Republican Party takes the black community as suckers. I said, well, brother, I don't know what you mean. I said, explain to me what that means. I said, that's a platitude. I don't know what you're talking about. Nothing. And so finally I interrupted and said, look, I'm a Republican not because I agree with everything that every Republican says or does. I said, I'm a Republican because I believe that the platform is compatible with my Christian views. I said, I cannot support a party that believes in the mass killing of unborn babies, which the Democrat Party does. I cannot support a party that is pushing homosexuality. I said, biblically, homosexuality is sin. You know what he said? Well, adultery is sin. And I said, yeah, but I don't see any adultery pride parades, do you? I don't see people going into the school saying, we're here to teach children about the wonders of being adulterers so that when they grow up, they can be adulterers. I say, I don't see any of that, do you? Silence. I said, you know what? I said, you folks who claim to be Christians are going to answer to God one day the 60 million babies and probably more by the time you stand before God who have been murdered by abortion are before the throne of God right now, condemning those who killed them. And when they stand before God unrepentant, they're going to find out that those were murders and they are held to their account. I love to argue, but I'm not going to argue, and then hung up on it. I said, no wonder the church, I'm making a leap here because I'm always reluctant to draw conclusions based upon the sound of people's voices and all of that because I have been fooled. Sometimes I think a person's black, turns out the person's white, sometimes I think a person's white, turns out the person's black. So you got to be, I hate stereotyping, but I think I'm about 95% certain this was a black preacher. And because he immediately, I said, and you try to cover up all of that sin that the Democrat Party supports because of race. He said, well, I didn't mention anything about race. I didn't mention anything about race. But the Republicans are the racists, blah, blah, and on and on and on it went. I thought, oh, my goodness. And this is somebody who purports to be a Christian. So, folks, we are in a spiritual battle. We are in a spiritual battle. Because, of course, the moment, and it didn't get disrespectful. I mean, he didn't say anything inappropriate to me, and I didn't say anything inappropriate to him. But it got heated because, of course, the moment he started launching down that the Republicans are treating the black community as a bunch of suckers, and then said he didn't mention anything about race. Well, that's what he raised the issue. So that's what much of my day is like. Thank God I don't get those kinds of calls to do. Those kinds of calls don't happen very often because I'm usually calling people who are at least lean in my direction. I mean, you have to deal. Let me tell you something. I'll just share this with you. Then I get onto some issues. I hope that you'll find this kind of as humorous as I do. You know, because people think, a lot of people from the outside in, they're looking, wow, you're running for president. Wow. Ooh, wow. That's glamorous. Ooh, man, that's. Let me tell you something, folks. You better have a very thick skin if you're going to run for any office. And I think the higher the office, the worse it gets. Because I've had everything from people hanging up on me to lecturing me about how they've gotten too many calls, they're tired of them, leave me alone, don't call me again, E.W. Jackson, I never heard of you. Who are you? You know, and I know you may think, but doesn't that bother you? Not a bit. It really doesn't. It just, to me, it just comes with the territory. But if you think, you know, now some people, but this is fairly rare, even rarer in Ohio, in Iowa, I should say. Some people, you know, you call and they do say, oh, wow, this is the first time I've had a presidential candidate call me. I've had people say, are you a robot? Is this a real person? I say, yes, I assure you, I am a real person. But look, if you have a fragile ego, oh my goodness gracious, forget it. You will be shattered within 10 minutes. You'll never want to pick up a phone and call anybody again. But you know, look, it's an adventure. It's fun. Of course, you get a lot of voicemails, but you do occasionally have someone to talk to. And sometimes, by the way, those conversations are wonderful. Sometimes those conversations are very disconcerting. I had one woman, a Republican, lecture me about, Republicans are going down this anti-abortion road and it's disastrous, and my husband and I, we're moderates and we want to walk the middle and we don't. I could barely get a word in edgewise lecturing me about how I need to get off the God stuff and get off abortion and get off homosexuality and you know, that's, you know, the Republican Party needs to come into the modern era and blah, 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 blah. I mean, it just on and on and on and on and went. Yeah, so it's an adventure, as I've said before. So just wanted to share that a little bit with you, give you a little bit of inside baseball on what my days are like, particularly when I'm not on the campaign trail, when I'm not out there, even when I'm not on the campaign trail. Believe me, I'm working on the campaign. And I have to say, sometimes I talk to people, and it is just immensely inspiring. I talked to somebody yesterday from Portsmouth. It was just tremendous. The guy's in ministry. We hadn't talked in a long time, but he was very gracious, very supportive, prayed for me on the phone, told me a lot about his ministry. In fact, you know, because I'm calling, obviously, for donations, and I'm not kidding you, folks. I got off the phone and made a donation to him because I thought, man, this guy is just doing some great work in the inner city, trying to help guys who've gotten caught up in that criminal lifestyle to come out of it and to realize what it means to be a productive, decent citizen. Trying to address some of the real issues of social disparity and economic disparity that are very real, but not because of racism, but obviously because of the breakdown of the family, which is at the heart of the problems that are confronting the inner city. And he's addressing all of that, and it was just inspiring to talk to. And he's going to support me. So because, of course, I told him, I said, I am profoundly concerned about those issues, too. You are dealing with it at the macro level. I'm dealing at the micro level. I'm dealing with it at the macro level, 30,000-foot level, talking about the impact of this stuff that's going on all over the country. You're dealing there in a particular community and actually addressing it on the ground. And I really admire that. I really do. I really do. I thought to myself, boy, some candidate you are. You're calling people for money, and you end up giving them money. So, yeah. But, you know, that's... look, I am first and foremost a Christian, a man of God. I love the Lord, and when I was frankly inspired. I was moved by what I was hearing about the work that he'd been doing. Like I said, I'd known him before, but we kind of lost track of each other, and it was just a blessing. So, just want to give you that kind of positive perspective as well. Like I said, I don't whine. It's just all this stuff. It just comes with the territory, folks. And like I said, if you don't have a thick skin, you shouldn't be doing this because this, believe me, this is not. I suppose there are some instances where your ego gets gratified, but I'll tell you what, there's a lot of stuff that's just downright nitty gritty, groveling through the muck and the mire to try to get to where you're going, and believing God that you're doing it in a way that honors and glorifies Him. I like the negative stuff I get. I don't ever respond to that out of Christian character. Now, I do respond now, don't get me wrong, and I can get aggressive in defending my position, but I don't ever disrespect a person or, call anybody out of their name or say something that is intending to be insulting to them. Now, sometimes I say things that people do find insulting, but it's not because I intend it that way. It's because I'm trying to get them to think. I said to a guy one time who was supporting a preacher, black preacher, was supporting, this was many years ago, was supporting distribution of condoms in the schools. And I said to him, I said, well, if you were really sincere, if you really believe that, I said, go to your church on Sunday morning and tell them that you want to start a program of distribution of condoms in the church. Whew. Oh, he took great offense at that. I mean, it almost got physical. I'm not kidding. It almost got physical. But I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. If you really believe this, why wouldn't you? If you're out here in the public square telling schools that they need to give kids condoms, you're a Christian, right? You're a preacher. You must believe that this is consistent with the will of God. Go back to your church and tell them that that's what you want to do. By the way, one church in L.A. Was doing that. I don't remember the preacher's name now, but they started doing that, and I called him on it, and I got the same kind of response. It was a very, very ugly, nasty response. But you know what that tells me? That people are just convicted by their sin. They're convicted by their wrongdoing. Because if they really believe that what they're doing is right, they don't have to get mad and want to fight you and want to curse you out. They just, defend their position and tell you why they think it's the right thing. And I haven't heard anybody justify, just like this guy yesterday. He didn't justify his positions on issues by referring to the Word of God or saying, here's why I believe this is the will of God. It was just basically, this is what I want, and that's all that mattered. This is what I believe. I'm quoting God's word to him and telling him what God says about unborn babies, what God says about homosexuality. He just basically dismissed all that. How in the world can the church be a healthy place of disciples of Jesus Christ when you got leaders like that who are basically trying to lead people into hell? In my view, that's exactly where he's going unless he repents, and that's exactly where he'll lead most of the people in his church if they don't get right with God. Because what he's teaching them is not a biblical worldview. He's teaching them a racial and Marxist and collectivist ideological worldview. And so that's the way they're looking at the world. And the Bible says friendship with the world makes you an enemy of God, and therefore friendship with God makes you an enemy of the world. There's no two ways about it. Okay. Wow. Spent a lot of time getting into that, but I hope you found that somewhat interesting and insightful. Now, I want to get into a couple of issues, and I don't usually talk about foreign policy. I don't talk about foreign policy much, but I do want to talk about foreign policy a little bit today. So I want to talk about a domestic policy issue and a foreign policy issue in the time I've got. Man, I've only got 11 minutes. Well, I'll probably run a little bit over. Let me just say as a disclaimer at the very beginning, I am not a supporter, a friend, a devotee of the Proud Boys, because I just don't know anything about them, really. And some of you may think, well, but you should you? Well, I guess, but I've got so many things to do that I've just never stopped and said, well, let me research the Proud Boys and see what they really stand for. And maybe I should, but I just haven't, and I probably won't, because here again, I've got a whole lot of other stuff on my plate. But Enrique Tarrio yesterday was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. 22 years in federal prison. Now, I've read some articles about his case, but I haven't seen anything that justifies a 22-year sentence. And did you all know this? I didn't until I read these pieces. He had been arrested in Washington, D.C. 2 days before and expelled from the city. I mean, literally expelled from the city, like the old-time sheriff. Be out of town by sundown. So he was staying in a hotel in Baltimore, and I guess communicating with people who were at the Capitol. So he wasn't at the Capitol on January 6th. He was not there. Yeah, he was not there. And a lot of people probably don't know that. By the way, as just a little aside, a footnote, I was invited to go to the Capitol that day. I am so glad I didn't. Now, the reason I didn't go, though, was not because I thought there was going to be trouble. I didn't go because my schedule just wouldn't permit it. You know, folks, most of the time, and I get invited to a lot of things, but it's very rare that I can just go to something as a participant. I will do that for friends and certainly do it for my wife and my family, just go and sit in an audience. But my schedule is so busy, I just don't have time for that. So if I'm not speaking, it's very difficult for me to go to an event. Not that I never do, but it's rare, okay? Because very often somebody wants me to attend something over here, I'm speaking over here. So I remember when I was invited that, you know, it's going to be a big rally and I thought, yeah, man, there's no way I can be there. I just thought no more of it. I'm glad I didn't, because I met somebody, in fact, several people who I know, but I met somebody recently who did go and did not enter the Capitol, sort of stood back at the periphery and watched. But they were contacted by the FBI and investigated by the FBI just for having been there. When you think about the fact that they can identify somebody who is on the periphery even of what they consider to be an insurrection, which is another crazy thing, but they couldn't find who had cocaine in the White House. Well, we'll leave that aside for a moment. My point is, Enrique Tarrio wasn't even there, but he's getting 22 years in prison. Now, let me say, I had not read the trial transcript. I do not know the facts that were presented by the prosecutor. So maybe if I read that, I'd say, well, you know, I kind of see it. Yeah, I don't think I would. Because here is what I really believe. That when you begin with the false premise that there were people who were literally trying to overthrow the federal government, which of course is a crime, when you begin with that premise, as opposed to people who were incensed over the outcome of the election and wanted to have the matter investigated, relitigated, heard by some neutral, fair party who could determine, is this election legitimate or is it, as many suspected, illegitimate because of cheating by the Democrats, because of ballot harvesting, because of little COVID machinations, drop boxes, and because of suppressing the Hunter Biden story and a whole bunch of other things. Was this election legitimate? And is there a reason to, at the very least, postpone its certification until that can be determined? Now, whether you're approaching that wrongly or rightly, if that's your attitude, folks, that's not a crime. That's not a crime. And that's not an attempt to overthrow the federal government. Now, you may deem, well, it's still wrong, but it's not a crime. Now, if your intent is to try to assassinate people and to try to overthrow the government or try to take over the Congress and kidnap people and all of that, if that's what you're intending to do, okay, now those are crimes. Those are crimes. And they're crimes that are punishable on a very serious level. I have not heard those things alleged against Enrique Tarrio, or for that matter, against anybody. Now, if I'm, here again, if I just don't have a command of the facts, those of you watching can say, oh, well, here's what you're missing. And you leftists out there who monitor my program because you want to make sure you can sabotage me whenever you can, or replay some comment that I've made that you think will hurt me. If I'm wrong, I don't have my facts straight, please enlighten me. Here's where I come down on it. This is simply another instance of why people are losing confidence in our criminal justice system. Because you take a guy whose political views may be extreme, or maybe you just don't agree with them, or what have you, and because he's expressing those views, in fact, there's a part of the article that quotes what the prosecutor has to say about Enrique Tarrio. Let me see if I can find that. And you think, well, my goodness, they could say that about me. By the way, he was very apologetic to law enforcement and said, you know, he's done with the stuff, so we'll see what happens. The prosecutor said January 6th was an act of revolution. They said, quote, Tarrio is a, quote, gifted communicator who excels at attracting followers and used those talents to inflame and radicalize untold numbers of followers, promoting political violence in general and orchestrating the charged conspiracies in particular. Now, this stuff of talent to inflame and radicalize, you could say that about me. I don't think I'm inflaming or radicalizing people, but I certainly, the left would probably say that about me. I say homosexuality is sin, it's an abomination to God. They say, see, he's inflaming people, he's radicalizing people. Now, of course, I always take pains to indicate that none of my rhetoric is intended to foster violence, because I don't want that ever said about me, because I just don't believe that that's the answer. But he's promoting political violence in general, in general. You know, that's to me a little weasel phrase, in general. What does that mean? And orchestrating the charged conspiracies, orchestrating the charged conspiracy. What conspiracies? What was the conspiracy? To overthrow the federal government? Was that it? I've heard that thrown around. I haven't seen any evidence or heard any evidence that that's in fact what was happening. And based upon the film that we've seen, it didn't look to me like people were there saying, okay, we're here to overthrow the government. I mean, to me, this was a riot gone terribly wrong. And were there some people maybe who had these grandiose ideas about overthrowing the federal government? Maybe. Was Enrique Tarrio one of them? I don't know. Maybe. That's foolish. That's stupid to think you're going to overthrow a nation of 333 million people with a few thousand at the Capitol, attacking one branch of government when you got two more branches that you're not going to get near. I mean, this is stupid. If anybody believed that. I guarantee most of the people who attended that rally, and some of the people who, probably most of the people who ended up in the Capitol didn't believe that. So my concern, frankly, is not with Enrique Tarrio. I'm concerned about all human beings, of course, and if he's unjustly in prison, I hope that that all gets worked out for him and he gets either exonerated or a sentence that is more in keeping with whatever crimes he is alleged to have committed or is convicted of having committed. But I'm concerned about our system, about the loss of confidence in it, in its ability to treat us fairly rather than punishing us on the basis of our ideological or philosophical or political perspective. We should never be doing that. Well, I'm not going to get very far into these other issues, but look, you've heard me say this before, I'll say it again. I hate hate speech, meaning I hate the concept of hate speech. You know why? Because to me, it is nothing but an excuse for restricting the First Amendment. I don't ever want to speak hatefully, although people will say the things I say are hateful. I don't view it that way. If I'm quoting the Word of God or I'm giving the biblical perspective, therefore God's perspective on things, people may find that hateful. It's not. Jesus said, if the world hates me, remember that it hated you first. They may hate me for it, but I'm not being hateful. Now, they'll say I'm being hateful, and therefore the speech I'm uttering should be restricted because it's hate speech. Well, you know, one person's hate speech is another person's love speech. When I say the soul that sins will die, and that a person who has devoted their life to the killing of unborn babies, to homosexuality, to drug dealing, to prostitution, and by the way, that's a whole other issue which I'll get into, these books that they're putting out now for children starting at ages 4 to teach them about the joys of being a sex worker, and that sex worker moms are doing an honor. I know, folks, no, Bishop, you got to be making this stuff up. I wish I were. I wish I were. We cannot afford to lose confidence in our criminal justice system. It has got to be fair to all. And I've said before, I'll say again, if by the grace of God I become president of the United States, I would appoint an attorney general like Matt Staver. He is my first choice, my first pick. And I would make clear to him, not that it would need to be said, but I would say it anyway to go on the record. Never, ever, ever is the Attorney General's office or the Justice Department to be used to punish our political adversaries. Ever. And if I find out that it's being used that way, I will fire anybody who does that on the spot. The moment I learn about it, the moment it is clear to me that that is what is happening, you will be fired on the spot. That's not the role of the criminal justice system. That's not the role of the Justice Department. That's not the role of the Attorney General. You're supposed to be calling balls and strikes fairly. And you're supposed to be prosecuting people on the basis of their violations of the law, not on the basis of whether you like them or not, or agree with them or not. I would protect just as vigorously the liberal, the leftist, in their right to hold cockamamie ideas, as I would defend the conservatives' right to hold reasonable, rational, normal conservative ideas. That's the way it's got to work, folks, or we're going to lose our country. So this is not a defense of Enrique or the Proud Boys. It's a defense of the American system of justice and the fact that we've got to restore people's confidence in it to do what is right. We got murderers running around the streets of our cities. People have committed multiple serious violent felonies. They're running around the streets of our cities. You got Enrique Tarrio in federal prison for 22 years, apparently because of things he said. Because he's over in Baltimore. Who's next? Me? You? The radicals who are inflaming people? I mean, it's got to stop. It's got to stop. Well, look, I wanted to get into some other issues, but I'm going to run out of time. I wanted to get into some foreign policy issues, so I'll come back to those tomorrow. I will say one other thing in passing, then I want to refer you to my website. COVID apparently is making a comeback. Not the disease, but the obsession with power and control. Because Fauci's on television now talking about restoring masks. Masks didn't work in the first place. Jill Biden has COVID again. She's been, you want to call it vaccinated, boosted to the hilt. And yet she's had, I think she's got it for the second and third time. One of the guy, who's the guy, Harold Ford on Fox News, he's been boosted 7 times, apparently had 3 vaccination shots. He's had COVID 3 times. I've never been vaccinated or boosted or any of that. I've had it 1 time. Now, I know that's anecdotal, but my wife and I know in our family people who got all that stuff and ended up having it several times. I think my wife may have tested positive. I think it was a false positive because she just really wasn't really sick. But she tested positive 1 time. I got really feeling bad 1 time, but it didn't test positive for COVID. I was out in Colorado at the time, was under the weather for about 2 days, but it wasn't COVID. It was some kind of little cold or virus or something, but been perfectly healthy. Perfectly healthy. And we got people all over the country dropping dead. And now you got these folks beginning to talk again. Well, maybe we need to shut down schools again. And this is my final comment on this, and I'm going to close out. I said this when this process started, all these restrictions, lockdowns. I said, once these people get a taste for power and control over people like nothing they've been able to exercise before, they will never want to let it go. And that's exactly what's happening. They want to bring it back. because they loved it. They loved the ability to order people around. They loved the ability to tell people that they had to stay in the house. They loved the ability to tell people they couldn't go to church. They loved the ability to tell people you have to wear a mask. They loved the ability to tell people you got to get the shot. They loved it. It was what they lived for, because they're really little budding tyrants. They just don't have the ability in a constitutional republic of free people to live out their dreams of controlling people. And COVID gave them that opportunity, and they will never forget it. And they want it back. And we're not giving it back to them. Fauci could just go stay in his little apartment and look at all the portraits of himself that surround him and leave the rest of us alone, because we don't want to hear it. And by the way, folks, I've said this before, I'll say it again. I do that a lot, don't I? Because I'm consistent. My Attorney General's office would launch an investigation into Anthony Fauci, his finances, his decision-making, his recommendations, to determine A, whether he was in some way influenced by Communist China, and B, whether he was being influenced in some illicit way by the pharmaceutical industry, and C, whether he was lying to the American people about certain things in order to advance those other interests. And if so, and what he's done rises to the commission of a crime, I would consider it to be one of the great accomplishments of my administration to put Anthony Fauci behind bars, because in my view, that's where he belongs. That has to be adjudicated, of course. As president, I don't get to put the man in jail. It has to be adjudicated. But that is my studied opinion right now, that Anthony Fauci has committed crimes against humanity and should be locked up for it. Okay, go to my website, ewjacksonforpresident.com, ewjacksonforpresident.com. And folks, remember the 20-20-20 path to victory. Pray for me for 20 minutes a week. Give $20.24 or $200.24 or $2,000.24, the maximum of $3,300 you can max out. If you're able to max out, please max out to my campaign. $3,300 for, if you're a married couple, the husband can give $3,300, the wife can give $3,300, that's $6,600. We need your support. I'm looking for 1 million people to give $20.24. 1 million people to give $20.24. And maybe we can go to 2 million or 3 million. But we get there, and we will run this campaign, and we will prosecute this campaign all the way to victory. I'm believing God for that. That's right. I'm believing God for that. I'm not, folks, I'm running because there is a cause. But I'm also running because I want to be president of the United States. I love this country, and I believe that I would make the best leader of those who are running right now, because I'm going to be turning to God for his wisdom. And I don't see anybody else in the race who's prepared to do that. If they are, they haven't said it yet. And I've said it repeatedly. Don't forget my book, my book, Sweet Land of Liberty, Reflections of a Patriot Descended from Slaves. You can buy the book through our campaign website. You can also go to standamerica.us and buy the book there. If you buy a book, if you sign up as a Patriot Partner for $25 or more per month, I will send you a signed, numbered copy of the book, Sweet Land of Liberty, Reflections of a Patriot Descended from Slaves. God bless each and every one of you. I love you. I love this country. Most importantly, I love the Lord. He heard my cry. And we're going to see to it that America is a nation whose God is the Lord, and not some kind of Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, atheist, secularist, Marxist, socialist nation, but a nation whose God is the Lord. So let's get it done, shall we? So in the meantime, you stand up, step up, speak up, refuse to back up, because we cannot be defeated if we will not quit, because we are on God's side.